They're coming to get you, Barbara.
It has been established that persons who have recently died have been returning to life and committing acts of murder. The unburied dead are coming back to life, seeking human victims.
This week on a podcast from beneath, Waxwork. William, how's it going?
I'm doing good, Carey. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, kind of tired, but we'll get through this one. So have you ever been to a wax museum?
I've passed by Madame Tussauds in Times Square, but the prices are pretty high. So the idea of spending that kind of money just to stand next to a wax figure, and especially when you can see them online. I actually did go to what is probably, it may not exist anymore, but when I visited, it was probably the worst wax museum in the world. It was the Hollywood Wax Museum. I don't know if it was on the Sunset Strip. What's the other main boulevard where they have all the stars on the street? Anyway, it was like the tourist trappy area of LA,
Right,
of
yeah.
Hollywood, and as part of the plane ticket, you got a discount on either the Ripley's Museum or the Hollywood Wax Museum. So I took the Hollywood Wax Museum, and it was the shittiest wax museum I've ever seen. First of all, the figures didn't appear to be wax. They appeared to be made out of styrofoam or something. And they were like figures with the fingers broken off. People put out their cigarettes on them. But it was quite entertaining. I have some photos that I took. Maybe I'll post them sometime.
There you go, yeah. Yeah, I think the only one I've been to, it's funny you mentioned the Ripley's. I believe it was either in Tennessee or probably maybe South Carolina at one of their local Ripley. And I believe they had like a small wax museum, and I remember going to that one. Wasn't really creeped out by it, so I'm trying to figure out why they felt a horror movie based on a wax museum would be effective.
Well, it goes back apparently. I mean, 1924 was when Paul Lenny, I think, the German director, did Waxworks, which was probably one of the first horror anthology films. And the idea was that each figure, I haven't seen the film, it's available on YouTube. Looks like it might be interesting. But the idea was that each figure, each little tableau in the Wax Museum sets off a story. One story is about Ivan the Terrible, one story is about Jack the Ripper, and one story is about, I think it's like an Arabian Nights story.
So basically the same storyline of what we watch for this.
It is similar. And as a
Waxwork.
matter of fact, I see on the Wikipedia entry for Waxwork, for Waxworks. What is this? Waxwork or Waxworks?
We watched Waxwork, which
Okay.
was confusing whenever I was trying to look it up too. I was like, well, what did I watch?
Well, it's even more confusing because, and this is a little off the topic, but it's one of many criticisms that I will make of this film. Waxworks is a term for a wax museum. Waxwork is a term for a figure in wax. Waxworks is chiefly a British expression. I don't think it was ever widely used in the United States. But in this film, all these young people who don't seem to have any knowledge of anything particularly, they all seem to know what a
Waxwork is.
Waxworks are. And they refer to it alternately as a waxwork. As a matter of fact, the sign in front of the house that's supposedly the Wax Museum in this says Waxwork, I believe.
Yeah, but it's like, did they have it? Was it 2 words on that sign?
Yes, it's 2 words.
Yeah.
But why waxwork? Waxwork would refer to a single figure, right? This is supposed to be waxworks. And most wax museums, if they wanted to seem classy, they wouldn't say waxworks, they would say wax museum or something like that. I mean, Madame Tussauds isn't known as a waxworks.
Right, yeah.
That's like a slang expression, I would think, in the UK. Anyway, I just thought it was kind of strange because in 1988, when this movie was made, no teenagers in the United States would have any experience with wax museums of any kind. They certainly wouldn't say, "Oh, waxwork, I know what that is," So that was kind of a flaw. But anyway, what was your original question? I got us off the track there.
Just what about a wax museum is worth a horror movie?
Well, I think probably and I've seen this, I think Robert Bloch, the guy who wrote Psycho, he also wrote a short story about somebody who is in a wax museum overnight, and the figures in the gallery of horrors, or the where all the criminals, are, they all start to come to life. So I think probably the idea was these figures were so realistic back when wax museums were popular, maybe in the 1890s. I don't know when they reached the peak of their popularity, but they were so realistic that people began to fantasize that maybe that there were real people underneath, or maybe that they could come to life or something like that. So it might have seemed like an attractive idea for horror stories. House of Wax, the Vincent Price movie, which is an admirable remake of Mystery of the Wax Museum. Both of those films have the same idea at the heart of the story, which is that a crazy guy who used to sculpt great wax figures, he has his hands damaged in a fire that started by his partner in the wax museum, who wants to burn the place down for the insurance money. And so he can't make wax figures anymore. So he survives the fire, and he decides to reopen his wax museum, but he's going to steal bodies and embed them in wax and use those as the figures. And as a horror story, we overlook the absurdity of that.
Yeah.
And we sort of accept it. I mean, obviously, the big problem is you take a body and you immerse it in boiling wax, you're basically boiling the body, right? It's not going to come out as a perfectly posed figure with rosy cheeks and bright eyes, You certainly, like in Wax Museum and in House of Wax and in Mystery of the Wax Museum, the sculptor, the mad sculptor, is going on about his Marie Antoinette. His masterpiece is Marie Antoinette. Well, Marie Antoinette wouldn't look too hot if it was a dead body that had been covered in wax. That would be a pretty hideous thing. So that idea doesn't really work, doesn't really make sense. It doesn't make sense in either version of that story that a guy could have a mask made out of wax that moves perfectly with his lips and his eyes.
Right, yeah.
And then suddenly when somebody hammers on it, it shatters into pieces like it's made out of cement. That doesn't really make sense. But the admirable thing about both of those stories is that they set up a sort of revenge story, and it has great dramatic potential, and they play it for all it's worth. I prefer Mystery of the Wax Museum. I think that's actually an excellent film. House of Wax is a nice job. It's beautifully shot. Of course, it was fairly early in the 3D craze, I guess. It was a big success as a 3D movie. Vincent Price is as entertaining as always. Carolyn Jones makes an appearance in it. But I like Mystery of the Wax Museum because that feels like a pulp magazine story come to life. It was early color films, 1933.
Is that the one with Carradine?
That's Lionel Atwill.
Okay. Because I started watching one that had Carradine in it, and I can't remember what it was called now.
Well, there may have been remakes or other. I know there was one with Cameron Mitchell made in the 60s or 70s. Terror at the Wax Museum or something like that. There seems to be an endless number of Wax Museum movies. But Mystery of the Wax Museum was Lionel Atwill and Fay Wray, who must have just finished doing King Kong when she did this film. And it was two-strip Technicolor. And for years, the color version, they shot it simultaneously, color and black and white. And for years, for decades, the color version was assumed to be lost. And then someone at the studio or one of the producers of the film found a color version. It was pretty degraded, but you could still get an idea of what it looked like. And I love that film. I thought it looked remarkably evocative. It looked like a pulp magazine cover, one of those lurid pulp magazine covers come to life. And Lionel Atwill, I think, is, on a par with Vincent Price. He always gives you a good show. And I guess that's why he, even after he had a fairly serious scandal in his life, Universal continued to use him. It's just he was too good to give up, So if you haven't seen that, there's a new restored version, and I understand the color on it is just spectacular now. That I would seek out if people are, if you like House of Wax and you want to see another version of that story, this is arguably superior to House of Wax.
Yeah, and of course we had the remake in early 2000s with Paris Hilton,
Yeah.
which it was, I guess the horror part of it was, I guess it was kind of like a Texas Chainsaw Massacre type story where they go to this old waxing museum and there's a family there that's killing, would kill the people and then use them as their sculpts, which,
Yeah.
just wasn't as good, but
Well, there's been a lot of movies over the years that have tried to take advantage of the fear that people have of figures, these sort of eerie, maybe it's like an early version of that, what do they call that? Uncanny Valley, that you see something that looks perfectly
yeah.
human, but at the same time, it's not alive. And so it causes people's imaginations to go, to run rampant. There was a film I think was called Tourist Trap, and there are scenes in that where I think the killer saves mannequins, and there's a lot of shots of the mannequins. And of course, there's what was the other one? There was another one that, there was a famous episode of The Twilight Zone where the woman he goes into the department store and all the department store dummies come to life.
Oh,
at
yeah,
night.
yeah.
And that really isn't a Waxwork story, but still the same idea of people being freaked out by dummies that may come to life, or ideas along those lines.
Yeah, there was a Christopher Eccleston, his first episode when he, as Doctor Who, had mannequins that would come to life.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They're kind of creepy looking.
Yeah, it is kind of a creepy thing. And I guess it's sort of similar to the fear that people have of ghosts. It's, you don't know if you can trust your own senses.
Right, yeah.
Did I see that thing move?
Because I always go back to ceramic dolls, China dolls. Those are always the eyes moving when you look at it. Gives you that kind of creepy feeling.
Yeah, along those lines too. Like all the movies that have been made about, like Child's Play and Chucky, and also Dead of Night, famous British anthology film that has the story about the ventriloquist doll. And Anthony Hopkins' movie, and I guess it was in the 70s, Magic, also about a ventriloquist guy with I don't know if it's possessed or what the deal is on that, but yeah, dummies, mannequins, wax figures can be creepy and spooky. The problem, and I thought this even when Paris Hilton's version came out, the problem really is that wax museums as a thing is pretty much something from the distant past.
Yeah.
It's very hard to make a story that really makes sense if you're talking about young people who are hankering to go see the wax museum displays. That doesn't really make sense. And Waxwork,
yeah.
Is it Waxwork? Yes. Okay.
It's Waxwork, yeah.
I'll probably have it right by the end of the hour. It was a $3.5 million movie, and it was funded by Vestron Pictures. Vestron Pictures was really on a spending spree around that time because they had a fair amount of success as a distributor of videos, VHS primarily. I guess, I don't know if they survived long enough to get into DVDs, but they figured out pretty quickly that the tapes that sold and rented the best were the ones that were recent theatrical releases. So they said, okay, let's start making our own theatrical releases. They had a few successes. I think they were involved with Dirty Dancing, which was a big hit. But they had more than their fair share of stinkers as well. But a lot of the movies seem to be designed like this one to simply have like a token theatrical release, so that you say it's a theatrical movie, benefit from the attention it gets from that, the publicity it gets from that, and then put it right out on video. And I understand that it was successful in this case. I assume it was because they did a sequel, which isn't something that happens that often. If you don't have a successful film, chances are you're not going to round two, especially when the price tag is $3.5 million, but the presence of Patrick Macnee and David Warner, that certainly is an attraction for people that are fans of the, British actors of a particular period.
John Rhys Davies, he was pretty popular back then too. Yeah, back
well,
then.
I guess it wasn't too long after he did Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Right, yeah.
He doesn't have much of a role.
No.
It's pretty much But I think my biggest objection is that the script, you know, it just, I don't know how you feel about it. And I can imagine somebody your age group, if you saw this first on video?
Yeah, I saw it first on video, and I enjoyed it.
Mhm.
And then we were talking about it later on, and you said, "Is this a Charles Band movie?" And I was like, "I don't think it
Oh, that's
is."
right.
But
Yes.
when I watched it again, I was like, "It does feel like a full moon feature."
Yeah. It has
And
that.
and of course, I do have problems with it now, seeing it later. But
Doesn't hold up for you.
I think the idea of uh the wax museum, the displays, you know, you can enter them and they become real. And of course, that's a good idea. Getting up to that point was boring, and I didn't like any of the characters, and
Yeah.
it seemed like they didn't know how to get to and I think it would have worked better. And this would have been like from your idea of you like movies with carnivals. I think if it was a carnival
Yes.
sideshow, probably would have been a better story. We
As
could
a matter
have
of fact,
a better way to get there.
when I saw how they were introducing David Warner, I thought, oh, this is going to be like Something Wicked This Way Comes. The Ray Bradbury, I guess Disney did a version of that in the late 80s, which wasn't entirely successful. But that idea of the carnival comes to town, that, you know, and the old strange man, you know, running the carnival. And I could see the teenagers saying, well, this looks interesting. This looks weird. We never had this happen before. But in this movie, what they do is they have these two, you know, they have the slut girl and her sort of shy, introverted friend. They're just passing by a house. And I guess in this town, everybody's rich. So the house is really more like a mansion. And as they're passing, David Warner sort of mysteriously appears next to them on the lawn, wearing what looks like a costume for a Ringling Brothers, you know, like he's a circus guy. And he engages in a little, you know, trite banter with them and invites them to come back later in the evening. And then he disappears again.
Yeah.
And the problem I have with this is first of all, why is he opening a wax museum in his house? I mean, who does that?
Right.
And why would anybody say, let's go to that guy's house because he says there's a wax museum in it? You know, I mean, it's just not a thing people would do, right? You don't go to people's private houses to see wax figures. It's ridiculous. It's not, and particularly with these kids who look like they're only interested in drinking and getting laid, you know, hanging out. Why would they be interested in any of this shit? And they try to suggest that maybe this girl, China, who's presented initially as the slut, and this movie has problems with women. I mean, it's really shocking the way the women are portrayed. It really is an 80s movie. You can see there's nobody woke yet. Everybody's sound asleep on these issues. But they try to suggest that she's such a slut that she's actually flirting with David Warner, you know, giving him the eyes. David Warner looks, I mean, he's a terrific actor, and I'm sure he's a terrific guy. But he's certainly not the sort of guy from appearances that a young, you know, a college-age girl would be winking and, you know, giving the eye to, especially since he's fucking weird, you know. And they don't react at all to the fact that this guy just suddenly appears in front of them and then disappears. And that apparently they're so, you know, calloused and cynical that doesn't faze them at all. I mean, if that happened to me, if I was passing a house and suddenly somebody sprung up out of the lawn, I would say, well, whatever they're selling, I'm not interested. I certainly won't be coming back at midnight for a party there, you know. But the other problem is, and I hope you can help me out with this because I've been trying all day to figure out what the fucking plot is. This guy was a sculptor of wax figures, and he steals trinkets from this Zach guy's grandfather, kills him in the process. And just as a side note, I knew I was in trouble with this movie when they have an opening scene of the film, and a film that's supposed to be a comedy, right? A horror comedy. And the opening scene is somebody getting their head set on fire and stuffed into a fireplace. The director doesn't really understand the concept of tone, right? You got to establish a certain tone, and starting your movie with a guy getting his head set on fire somebody we don't even get to meet. It's just some guy who gets his head set on fire. I don't even know if they probably described it that way in the cast list.
Yeah.
That's not a good way to start a movie like this, right? The best way to start a movie like this would be to have a sense of normalcy. Everything's going fine. Everything's going great. And then the weird element comes in, right? You don't start with violence and weirdness. And then, for a while, I thought I was watching Society again. And I was getting ready to curse. Carey did this to me again. But let me just stick with the plot. So he's a sculptor. He gets these trinkets because Zach's, and I don't remember the actor's last name, but he's the Gremlins guy.
Yeah, Galligan.
Galligan, okay. Zach Galligan's grandfather and Patrick Macnee apparently enjoy collecting trinkets, as he describes it, from the most evil people that ever lived. And we put aside for a moment the fact that apparently the most evil people that ever lived include the Phantom of the Opera, Count Dracula, Frankenstein monster, and who am I leaving out?
The Wolfman.
The Wolfman, yes. Those are the most evil people that ever lived. And the idea, as Patrick Macnee explains late in the movie in what felt like a half-hour monologue, the sculptor, David Warner, whose last name is Lincoln for some reason, he uses these trinkets and performs some sort of voodoo ritual by creating a wax effigy of these evil people and embedding the trinket in them. He can bring them to life, but they exist in some sort of other dimension. And the other dimension is sort of like whatever the display in the Wax Museum is. That's their world.
Right.
Does this make any sense so far? I mean, I have to admit, it doesn't make any sense to me. Why would a wax museum, why would a sculptor for a wax museum be stealing these trinkets? Why would he have any knowledge or interest in voodoo? And the whole point apparently is, if he can lure enough victims into his wax museum, he can push them into these other dimensions, and the evil people will kill them or enslave them or something, and they become part of the tableau, and then the zombie apocalypse will happen. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that.
Does that make any sense?
Not really.
No, right. And all through the movie, it's like one nonsensical thing after the other because they didn't really have a story. They mistook complexity for cleverness. They thought that we could just keep adding stuff, little more stuff here, more stuff there, and that somehow that will equal a good story, but it doesn't. I mean, the story for House of Wax is, nobody needs a guidebook to understand that, right? And it's effective as a drama because it is so straightforward, and we understand everybody's motivation. We don't buy the idea that anybody would be crazy enough to be dipping dead bodies in wax to make figures for Wax Museum, but we accept that as sort of, okay. But in this, we don't even understand when these people are victimized and they become part of the tableau, right? Which is, I assume what happens. It seems to happen almost immediately, right? Right.
Yeah, it seems like
pushed in.
Yeah.
And then a moment later, other people look over and they see that person is now part of the tableau, right? The victim of Dracula or the Wolfman or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. But at the end of the movie, David Warner has a big vat of bubbling wax in his basement, right? And the implication is that he's taking the bodies of those people and putting them in wax and then putting them on display. But that's not right? He doesn't do that. So what's the bubbling wax for?
I have no idea.
And how is it possible that when the police detective finds, I guess it's the body of China, girl from the slut girl from the beginning?
Yeah, and the Dracula.
Right, he digs something out of her cheek. And I don't even know what it is that he's digging out of her cheek. Do you know?
I'm assuming that he just, whenever, like, she's wax now, but where she was human before, like, he's getting, like, wax, like, I guess her muscles are made out of wax, and that's what he got out. That's the way I took it.
Wait, you're putting a lot of effort into that explanation. The Writers Guild should pay you for... You have to be a union member before you start coming up with these ideas, Carey.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't figure out for the life of me what the point of that was. And of course, in the movie, as it plays out, it doesn't have a point. It doesn't have because before the guy even takes 10 steps away, first they had this big elaborate scene of him clawing the stuff out of her cheek. And then for some strange reason, there's a big close-up of him trying to prod the piece of whatever the fuck it is into a plastic bag, and he can't do it. So he picks it up and throws it into the plastic bag with a sort of sound of disgust, like, ooh, I didn't want to touch it. Well, what is it? I don't even know what it is. Then he gets up and he walks 5 steps and he falls into the mummy display.
Yeah.
I guess the mummy also counts as one of the most evil people that ever lived. And when he's in these worlds, who are the other people? I mean, I know who the mummy is, and I know who the Wolfman is, and I know who Frankenstein's monster. I know a lot. But what about all these other people? Where do they come from?
I couldn't figure out I don't know if they were, who was some famous, like, explorers that would have, I just figured maybe that's who they were supposed to have been.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of this concept that they're developing, that he created these wax figures of these evil people, did he create wax figures of all their subordinates?
Right, yeah.
I mean, when he gets pushed into this mummy world, right away he's standing next to a beautiful woman. Who is she?
I have no idea.
And there's an older guy who's telling him to help him lift the
vault, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, they can't resist putting snakes and tarantulas inside a tomb that's been sealed for well, we let that go, right? That's yeah, I don't understand any. It seems to be one of those movies where they're sort of getting along on the fact that a lot of people are good-natured and good-hearted, and they'll say, it's just entertainment.
Yeah, just
they won't take it seriously. But
we also had characters that were almost like fans of certain exhibits and experts. The cop. He was like fascinated with the mummy. He knew all about it. And then you had the one girl. She was really into Dracula, so that's the one she ends up in.
And one who's really into the Marquis de Sade.
Which I didn't. I was like, well, why would they put him in there?
Yeah,
that's not even like a popular character. Like I had to look it up, see who.
Well, I could see them saying, I could see somebody running a wax museum saying, let's have a figure of the Marquis de Sade because he's a notorious figure in history. But the truth of the matter is, he was just a writer. He was a writer and a philosopher and a political satirist, I guess you'd say. His stories are famous because of the extraordinary vulgarity and profanity. The sexual content is hair-raising. Even today, the stuff he writes about is amazing. But he wasn't one of the most evil people who ever lived.
Yeah. I thought he was chaining people up and whipping them.
No, I mean, Marquis de Sade spent half of his life in prison and in mental institutions. But there was never a formal charge brought against him, as far as I know. It was mostly because of the scandalous stuff he was writing and because he was apparently pro-French Revolution. So those might have been the reasons why they put him away. His writings cover a pretty wide range of things, but the stuff that he was writing, the sexual stuff that he was writing, that is pretty hard stuff to take even now. And I imagine at the time it must have been, really shocking. Also, at that time, you could go to jail just for blasphemy.
Right, yeah.
You could go to jail for participating in an orgy, which apparently he did do on at least one or two occasions. But he was kind of had a sort of sad life. I mean, it wasn't all this business whipping, young women and that. And I thought that was a particularly distasteful scene. The idea that she apparently has to be convinced that it isn't such a good idea to die from whipping in order to achieve her first orgasm. That's weird shit. I don't know what that's doing in a movie like this.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought that was just having him as even the end villain was kind of weak. I would rather have seen the Dracula character be like the main.
Well, maybe the problem was the guy who was playing Dracula was such a lump. I mean, Miles O'Keefe, who was the big hunk guy from Tarzan, the Bo Derek Tarzan movie. And apparently when you put clothes on the guy, he's no use.
Right,
so
I just thought the sword fighting between Zach Galligan and Marquis de Sade at the end was kind of They didn't need it.
Yeah,
You
well,
know.
that whole scene at the end with all the different monsters. I mean, I suppose it prefigures what's the one with Sigourney Weaver, Cabin in the Woods, or
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's a similar idea of trying to bring all the different monsters together in one universe. I think they were much more successful, even though I didn't particularly like that film. It was a hell of a lot smarter than this one. I mean, they even had the Little Shop of Horrors planned in it.
Yeah. Well, I saw that. I think when I first seen it, I was like, okay, I thought it was the pod people from Invasion of the Body
Yeah.
Snatchers. But then when it talks at the end, I was like, okay, they're obviously. I
Yeah.
didn't know if maybe it was supposed to have been
Oh, it
Invasion of the
must
Body
have.
Snatchers, and then somebody else added in editing, someone was like, oh, that's Little Shop of Horrors. Let me add the sound, the voice to it, and
Well, it doesn't make any sense either way, right? Because Invasion of the Body Snatchers involves aliens, and this is supposed to be all about evil humans.
right, yeah,
And certainly doesn't make any sense that the plan, but the idea again is they're hoping that people will be generous and say, "Oh, isn't that funny?" They
yeah,
do that, at the time, I guess Little Shop of Horrors was on its way to being a big movie. I think it was already a success on Broadway. It
yeah. I
was
don't know if
probably,
the movie came out, but I think the movie had already been out before
maybe
this one,
so.
right?
Well, that was a pretty big production. I think at the time it was one of the most expensive movies ever made.
Yeah,
And so I could see them sort of thinking, well, we should probably work something in about that one because that's going to be a big hit. But it doesn't make sense in the movie, and the fact that they're so willing to throw aside the logic of their own story, the world that they created, and introduce elements like that, that really doesn't speak well of their abilities as storytellers. You have to have a little bit of integrity, even if you're doing a comedy, right? There has to be some sort of consistent through line. Here they got, we're told one thing one moment, we're told another thing another moment. Apparently at one point, Zach Galligan decides that if you don't believe in these creatures, then they can't harm you.
they can harm. Yeah,
That seems little like a sort of a last minute thing to be throwing in there,
yeah. I feel like they just maybe when they got to the end of the movie, they thought, oh, maybe we don't have enough, so let's just add. So they just started adding other, 'cause I think there was some kind of snake person that I seen. There was a
Yes.
bunch of things at the end that you didn't see during the film that seemed like
Yeah.
maybe just went through and added real quick.
It's a real shit show at the end. I mean, it goes to show you how uh, when they try to do those sort of spectacular finales, everybody fighting and everything burning down, if you don't have a really talented group of people doing it, you end up with a lot of crap. I mean, I was like watching the movie with one eye. I mean, the right phone. Yeah.
Of course, it was written in 3 days. If that's not surprise, that's probably not
Well,
surprise you, right?
what a shock!
Yeah.
It took 3 whole days.
Mhm.
Well, okay, so it wasn't something that they just sort of scribbled on the back of a napkin on the way to the
No,
studio.
no. And I guess they were going to try to get Jason Voorhees, the children from Village of the Damned, and The Thing, but I guess for or copyright reasons they couldn't use them. So
Yeah.
that's
Also, none of those would make sense in the story either, right?
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
ideally, if you were going to proceed from the original notion that they collected some trinkets from evil people that actually existed, and they used those to create these effigies. All right, well, right there you could say, well, that limits you to people like Rasputin, maybe, if you want, or Jack the Ripper, or who else can we? Hitler, possibly.
Right.
Or,
Yeah.
they should be actual people that actually live, not fictional characters that would be known as fictional characters, even to the fictional characters in this movie, right? The kids in this movie would certainly know who Dracula and Frankenstein are. They would know that they're not real people in history. They're fictional characters. So what is that? How can you have Marquis de Sade on the one hand and Frankenstein's monster in another scene? And is it Frankenstein's monster that's the evil one, or is it his creator that's the evil?
Yeah.
You didn't get to see his creator, I don't think.
No. What was I gonna say? I forgot what I was gonna say now.
Well, what I would say is that with this movie, it's an indication to me of how sometimes having a big budget can be a trap. I know the $3.5 million is not a lot of money for a
Yeah.
Hollywood film, but for a low budget film, for a low budget indie film, that's a tremendous amount of money. I mean, Halloween was made for a few $100,000.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
Same
I would say that they definitely saved money by not building wax figures because you can
Yes.
see everybody moving
Right.
when they first go in or looking at each display, you can clearly see the people moving and breathing.
Right from the beginning.
Yeah.
We don't get any warm-ups or any, time to sort of enjoy the idea that they might be wax museum figures. No, they're breathing and moving
Yeah.
right from the start. And I don't know why, when they do scenes like that, why can't they just say, let's take a still picture of them?
Yeah.
Let's use the still picture, that wouldn't have been that hard, right? Or even just slow down the footage.
Slow down the foot. Yeah.
Take
I was
a
gonna say.
long take and then slow it down, right? And then the movement would be
It's
impossible to see.
Yeah.
But everything about the movie seems to have been dictated by what they were able to afford. And when you bring in people like David Warner and Patrick Macnee and a few other people who are name actors, you can see that a lot of that, a budget going to them right away. And so, you're only going to have them on certain days, which creates all sorts of pressures on how you're scheduling things. And it means you end up with silly things like, it's a story about a wax museum where there is no wax museum. It's a house.
Right. Yeah.
Right away, you're missing one of the best opportunities to really set the tone and set the mood for it by having some sort of exterior of a real wax museum, and you could, just like they do with House of Wax. I mean, they have that scene with the guy in the House of Wax playing with the paddleball. I don't know if you've seen House of Wax recently, but at the grand premiere of the museum, of the new wax museum that Vincent Price is opening, they got a guy with a paddleball out front, like a barker. Come right in, folks, and see the wax museum. And the ball is bouncing into the audience because it's a 3D movie.
Yeah.
And when I saw that in the theater, I saw it as a kid. And his House of Wax freaked me out as a kid. You're easy to freak out when you're a kid.
Yeah.
But I thought that was amazing. You could see the ball zoop, zoop, zoop out into the audience. And they stay with it a little too long, I think. It's like 5 minutes of the movie.
You're right. Yeah.
But that was always one of the curses of 3D movies, is that the directors always feel pressure to make use of the 3D effect, and it draws attention to the fact that it's a movie. And I can't really think of any 3D movie that I've seen where I really thought that the 3D added significantly to it. Maybe House of Wax is the only one.
Yeah, maybe.
Andy Warhol did Flesh for Frankenstein, and it's actually Paul Morrissey did Flesh for Frankenstein, which is a pretty good 3D movie, but it's a comedy, really, a spoof of Frankenstein movies. So, it doesn't really need to generate any real suspense. It's just fun to watch. So when Udo Kier playing Dr. Frankenstein, when he gets run through at one point with a big stake or a big spike, and he has his spleen hanging on the end of the stick, and it's dangling. At least it appears like it's dangling right in front of you, if you're in the audience. Those are kind of fun things,
Yeah.
I saw that movie with an audience on several occasions because it ran at the theater I used to work in, and that always got a great reaction.
Yeah, I guess Friday 13th Part 3 was in 3D, and they had the obvious, somebody doing a yo-yo, and they're filming.
Somebody has a yo-yo? Yeah.
And then somebody swinging a baseball bat, but they stop in their backswing. They stop way too long. That way the bat's in your face.
Oh,
It was
right,
just,
right,
you could just tell that's what they were doing.
I seem to remember in Friday the 13th, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an expert on those movies, but isn't that the movie where he crushes the guy's head and his eyeball pops out?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. That was a pretty good use of 3D.
Yeah, that's a good one.
but House of Wax may have, I suppose you could say that all the things you can do with 3D were probably done in that movie, right? They're really, even and I really dislike modern 3D because it always looks too dark and murky, for my taste. I mean, they're already making movies, even biggest budget Hollywood films are being shot as, dark and sort of grim, the grim dark look.
Yeah.
So the problem with that is that 3D, since you really have two images, being projected on the screen, you need more light. Matter of fact, when we were running Flesh for Frankenstein, the distributor instructed us to paint our screen silver so that the light would bounce right back into the audience, because you can't allow the light to become diffuse. You need the intensity of the light, otherwise the picture becomes too dim to see. So a lot of the 3D movies that I've seen, and I haven't seen a whole heck of a lot of them, but the ones I've seen, they're pretty dark and murky looking.
Yeah. I remember I seen Captain America in 3D, and it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was the glasses is what, just sitting there wearing those glasses would get you. But there was a couple of scenes where he would throw the shield, and it was pretty effective. But a couple of the like animated films they worked better in 3D.
They do, yes.
Like there were scenes where it was snowing, and it was just like it was almost like it was snowing in the theater.
Right, because they have complete control over the image, right? I mean, it's not like when you're shooting live action, I assume you have to have two cameras, or there's one camera that's recording two separate images that one is focused on the background, the other is focused on the foreground, and then those images are put together. With the animation, everything can be done just right. I remember seeing Superman Returns. Remember that attempt they made to reboot the Superman series? And they finished the movie just as the 3D craze was starting to peak. So they decided what they would do is put a few scenes in the movie that would be 3D, and the rest of the movie would be 2D.
Right.
And there would be a little signal that would appear at the bottom of the screen when the 3D scene was coming up, and the audience would put on their glasses. Now, this is a really ridiculous way to show a movie. But it did give us an opportunity to see how much we're missing when we see things in 3D, because you could see the 2D image, which was crystal clear and brilliant and beautiful, and then you put on your glasses to watch the 3D thing, and it's like you're looking at a dirty toilet bowl. And before the movie, they ran one of those Ice Age shorts. The Ice Age movies? They're little.
I think that's one of the ones I've seen in 3D.
And that looked fantastic in 3D. I mean, that was really amazing. Sort of reminded me of, like, you remember the GIF? Is it GIF viewer, home viewer? Those little plastic things, and you put a little card in it, and it would show you like stereoscopic pictures. The ones that worked the best were the ones that were made specifically for the viewer. The ones that tried to use images from other sources, that never quite worked. But the cartoon stuff always was very impressive. You always got that thing stood out so clearly against the background that it felt like real 3D. So I don't know where that leaves us as far as
maybe Waxwork should have been in 3D. That would have been more enjoyable.
Possibly, or maybe it would have made it more annoying. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the ending wherever the Patrick Macnee shows up with, I guess a bunch of his friends. They all show up at the end to fight the monsters, and he had his wheelchair and now it's got like flames on the side, the spikes on the front. I was like, oh, seems like something they just made up that day when they were filming. Like, hey, what are we gonna do?
Well, I don't know if Patrick Macnee was so infirm at that point in his life that he was in a wheelchair, and that it had to be that way in the movie. It's possible, because I think he did have problems with his legs towards the end. But I don't know in 1988 if that was true. But it sort of would be hard to understand why he would be in a wheelchair if he himself wasn't crippled, or he wasn't able to get around on his legs anymore. So I assume that he was physically incapacitated at that point to some extent. Although I think, didn't he do A View to a Kill right around the same time, the Roger Moore?
I can't remember what year that came out.
Yeah, maybe that was earlier in the 80s. But in any case, I felt sorry for him, because I always feel, and I'm a great fan of his, I love the Avengers. We've talked about the old British Avengers TV series. And I always thought that his performance in it, everybody talks about how great Diana Rigg was, and she was great. And Honor Blackman was great in her time. And the other actors that took over that role were terrific as well. But the heart of the thing was Patrick Macnee. His performance as Steed is the sort of unflappable, always polite, always, charming and funny, always dressed perfectly. That's such an admirable character. You wish you could be that. I wish I
Yeah.
could be him more than James
Right,
Bond.
yeah.
Because James Bond looks like he has a pretty hard life, actually. He's always got people trying to shoot him or stab him, even the women he's sleeping with are trying to kill him. But Steed, he's such a nice guy, it's hard to imagine anybody trying to kill him. So I always like to see him in movies, but I feel sorry that he didn't really get many roles that were worthy of him, in his later life. I guess the performance in The Howling was probably the best movie. That was the best thing he got to do.
Yeah.
If you look at all of his later films, they're pretty a mangy bunch, with the exception of The Howling. So that's a shame. The little fellow, who I think was the smallest person in the world at that time, I had seen him in person at Ringling Brothers and Bonham and Bailey Circus when I was a kid. I forget his name, Mikush.
Mahili Michu Mazaros or something like that.
And he was from Hungary, I think, or Budapest is in Hungary, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, well, that's, yeah. Anyway, the interesting thing about him is, in addition to being a circus performer, he's the guy that ended up playing Alf.
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you know that?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So there is Alf in this movie. There's a little Alf in this movie.
Well, here's the big question. Was anybody in this movie on Columbo?
Yes, Patrick Macnee was on Columbo.
Okay, I figured if it was going to be anybody, it'd be him.
I knew you were going to ask that.
Or maybe John Davies. I thought maybe he could have been on one, but
no, I think he was too young. I don't think he wouldn't have been active or known as an actor when Columbo was. He might have ended up in later episodes. I know they did that whole, the 90s episodes.
Yeah.
So he might have been in one of those. That I don't know. I don't speak about the 90s episodes.
Yeah.
But the 70s episodes, Patrick Macnee played the captain of the ship in the episode where Columbo investigates a murder on a cruise ship. Robert Vaughn, I guess, is the killer in that.
I guess he had his death scene in this movie when he gets his head ripped off, and he says something, and I can't remember. He says something like "Oh golly," or something as he's getting his head ripped off.
Yeah, I heard. I couldn't quite make it out. Yeah,
it was so good that whenever they made the second one, they hit it's like in there as a flashback.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, the second one's like starts off as soon as this one ends. So they do like a little, here's what happened, the last 5 minutes of the last movie before it picks back up. But it involves time travel, and of course they replace the actress that plays his girlfriend. So that's just like it's a big jolt when you're like, oh, that's not the same girl.
Yeah. Well,
it's not as good as this one. Yeah.
The actress learned her lesson.
I guess so.
But and the Zach Galligan guy, he's not back, right?
Yeah, he came back. He came back for the second one. Yep.
Glutton for punishment.
And it's like it's like a completely different character. It's almost like they realized that no one liked that character, so they changed him for the second one. Different clothing, and now it's just weird.
What
movie.
What was the thing? There were two things that struck me as being kind of odd, and maybe the fact that the script was written in 3 days is the reason for this. But what was this obsession with smoking?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what that was about.
He has at least 2 or 3 shots in the movie where he's shown puffing on these long cigarettes that, I mean, if an actor isn't a smoker in real life, probably shouldn't try to smoke on screen because it never looks convincing.
He even had like, when he was leaving the house, his butler's like, oh, here's your nicotine and here's your alcohol. And it's just like, I don't know what that was about.
The other weird thing is, I mean, it's almost as weird as the fact that a wealthy family in a small town America would have an English butler, but we'll put that aside.
Yeah. And who played that? Because he looked familiar too.
He's a British comedian. I don't know if he's done any other movies that Americans would be familiar with, but he's apparently a long-standing British stage comedian. He's recognizable. I know I recognized him as soon as I said, "Oh, I wonder who that." I know that guy, but why is he in this movie? Why is this family have a British butler?
Yeah.
And how does it come to pass that this guy is the butler of this family all these years, and yet he's also working with Patrick Macnee to chase after this Lincoln guy. And Patrick Macnee, when we come upon him in the movie, I guess he's sitting at a piano and playing a song or something. Was that what he's doing?
I believe so, yeah.
So he doesn't look like he's really knocking himself out to find this Lincoln guy.
Yeah.
He's sort of sitting around hoping that someday somebody will come in and say, oh, by the way, there's this guy setting up a wax museum, and he'll be able to say, we found him at last. That's kind of hard to believe. They come in and the girl tells their little story, and then Patrick Macnee is able to piece together everything else.
Everything else, yeah. Well, you said it before, the same problem with the Changeling. They go to the library and they find everything they need to know, right?
Yeah. In this case, they go up to the attic, and every box they open has something relevant to, including her finding.
It's just weird that Zach Galligan's character is even connected to any of it at all. It's like, why? It doesn't need to be that. You don't need to connect everything to your main character.
I think that when I see stuff like that, it's like a crutch that writers use, that instead of coming up with a story that really makes sense, they try to convince you of its realism by having everything sort of looped together. It's like Star Wars disease, where everybody ends up being related to everybody else. And I don't think they realize how much that destroys the story, because spontaneity, the idea that anybody could have gotten sucked up into this adventure, is part of the fun for the audience, right? I think that's true for Star Wars as well. I mean, it doesn't make me feel better to know that just a select few group of people that have, a special, place in history, or fate has decided those are the only people that get to go on the adventure. The rest of us schmucks, we just have to sit back and I don't know, bide our time until the empire is overthrown.
I mean, the Goonies got it right. I mean, none of the kids are related to the pirates that were, I'm saying, it's just they just happen to do it,
That's the other thing. And this film, this part of it really felt like Society, and it's a sort of weak attempt to do a satire of rich people, to take sort of a jab at rich people. And here they got this woman. And one thing I know about rich people, I don't know many rich people.
Right.
I knew a few folks in college that had wealthy parents, and I spent a little time around them. And one thing I know is that whatever we might think about rich people, most of them are not fools.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going to sit at the dinner table and be unable to see their son while they're conversing because of the big centerpiece that's in front of them.
Right.
That's not rich people, particularly older, middle-aged, older women. They are expert in all that sort of stuff, how things should be in the household, right? Appearances are very important. So the idea that just for the sake of some stupid sight gag, they would put that big centerpiece in the way so they have them leaning to be able to talk to her. What is that? Then they have this nonsense about her telling him that he can't drink coffee.
Yeah,
that's a characteristic of rich people, that they prevent their college age sons from having coffee with their breakfast. I mean, what is that? It's the sort of thing that if you wrote it, you would tear up the paper and say, oh, no, that's no good. You would never let that go to the actor, because God forbid they might actually read it, and yet here it is in the movie, it doesn't make any sense. And that character, she disappears. We go to the trouble of introducing her and having that extended dialogue scene with her, and then she's never heard from again. What's the point of that?
Right.
And the only thing I can think of is they had certain sets, right? And they said, we got to do everything on this set. So that room that they were in when they're having breakfast, that might be the same room that they redressed and used later when they're visiting Patrick Macnee. Maybe even the same room that they have the wax figures in, the tableaus.
Right.
So they say, it's got to be done here. And since it's such a grand space, this can't be like a working class family. It's got to be rich people. We got all this fancy furniture sitting around in the prop department, so we'll make use of it, make it look like a big, lush, expensive movie. But it doesn't really make sense. I don't know why we're following more rich young people.
I guess that was just something they did in the 80s there, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, they mostly working class folks, right? They don't have a crowd.
Right, yeah.
And I assume that to some extent they were looking over at the success of Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and those other movies. I can see somebody who's a fan of slasher movies looking at this and saying, well, that was kind of refreshing. For once, it had a little bit more to it than just, a guy going around with a knife and stabbing people.
Right. Yeah.
But the problem is, as admirable as it is that they wanted to do something different, they didn't have a fucking story.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Again, like I said, rewatching, I was just like, just getting to the museum was boring. I didn't care for it. I thought that idea was a good idea. They just didn't execute it well.
And also, they face a real problem. As somebody who's written a few things myself over the years, the thing that would really worry me about that premise is how are your characters supposed to act when they get pushed into this other dimension?
Yeah, because I noticed when our first guy gets pushed into the werewolf one, he's not bothered by it. He's like, oh, it's a joke. Who's playing this joke on me? It's like, dude,
Right.
like you've got long hair now and your clothes are different, and you think somebody just pulled a joke on you. It's just.
Well, let's be honest. In a situation like that, what most people would do would be to fall completely silent.
Yeah.
You would just sort of sit down and you would try to compose yourself, and you would be thinking, "What the fuck is going on?"
I guess that was the comedy part of the movie.
That's it. Yeah, they're trying to make it funny, but the problem is by trying to make it funny, it's implausible. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole sequence, to be honest with you, it's not really very well done. I mean,
Yeah, and another thing too is, like I said, when he gets knocked into, he steps into that one and he's acting like, oh, it's somebody's playing a joke on me or whatever. And when the girl goes into the Dracula one, she almost becomes a part of it immediately. Like she's just playing, what I'm saying? Like she's that character all of a sudden.
yeah,
I didn't really understand that part of it.
inconsistency.
Yeah.
But the mean-spiritedness of some of the stuff. You have characters that are incidental characters that suddenly appear and we're supposed to care about them, I guess.
Right, yeah.
And then just assume they're being ripped into pieces. What was the business with the guy with his leg sawn off?
Yeah, I couldn't. Yeah, and he kept saying. I guess he kept talking to her like it was her husband.
Yeah, but
But
why was
I don't know.
why was his leg missing?
Yeah, I don't know.
One of the things about Gothic horror is that the horror aspect has to have a certain elegance about it. If the characters are humiliated, it's not as effective. There has to be a romantic quality to it, because the whole idea is that we're trying to convince the audience of the attraction of evil. You could, in the best Dracula and vampire stories, you could almost imagine yourself saying, that might not be such a bad life, right? Maybe it's not so awful. And in movies like, what's the one with Tilda Swinton? Only Lovers Left
Alive. Yeah.
That, which I think is probably one of the best vampire movies ever made, that, in addition to being a sort of a satire of gentrification, the idea that the vampires, if we're just following the vampire aspect of it, the idea that the vampires consider themselves so civilized that they don't actually bite people anymore.
Yeah.
They just, find other ways to get the blood, and they treat it almost like fine wine, or like drugs, the high quality stuff, that's the direction that you should be going in with that type of story, I think. But here we suddenly find ourselves in a room with a guy with his leg missing and I guess a rat nibbling at his tattered foot. This is not very pleasant. It's not scary, so it doesn't work on that level. So
I think that was just probably more the comedy side to it.
Well, didn't get much of a laugh from me. But
I was reading here about all of the exhibits that were in there, and they do list that is supposed to be the pod from Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, is it?
So
really?
someone has just added that. Whoever was editing it thought it was funny to add the Little Shop of Horrors voice over top of it.
That makes it even sloppier, I guess.
Yeah, and of course I noticed I forgot about it. The baby from It's Alive.
Oh yes,
was also in it. Yeah. So that seems like an odd.
Yeah. They're covering.
Maybe he knew. Who was it that made that movie?
Larry Cohen,
Yeah, maybe they were
yeah,
friends or something. I don't know.
possibly, yeah. Uh, I mean, I understand the attraction of doing uh, homages to one's favorite filmmakers, but you also have to have a story.
Yeah,
It can't just be that. It can't just be let's invite all our friends over from Monsterland and have a party. There has to be some sort of story, I think, and I don't think that they had a story here. It's just a
no.
mess, you know. But it was reasonably well shot, I suppose, as you would expect for a movie with a budget of that sort. And I don't suppose the actors could be blamed. They're not too bad, right? Given the material.
Right,
Uh,
yeah.
the fellow that plays the guy that gets pushed into the werewolf thing, he ended up in Twin Peaks, right?
I
He was,
believe so. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And of course, Miku went on to do Alf, and Zach, whatever his name is, I
Galligan?
guess he's still acting, right?
I believe so. The last I know he done some Star. I know he was on some Star Trek.
Oh, was he? Yeah.
Either in the movies or the Next Generation. I know he's done some other like low budget movies after that, but
Mhm.
I've met him before. He's a decent guy.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure all
Yeah.
these people are nice people, and I'm sure that there was no evil intent in making this movie. I'm sure it was
Right,
done,
yeah.
but it's just I guess my biggest criticism would be the tone, the inconsistency in the tone,
Yeah.
and the inability to say this is the direction we want, this is the effect we want to achieve. Let's do that. Instead, they want to do this and that and the other thing, and it just ends up like a big hash.
Yeah. I would say drop the comedy part of it and have it as a traveling circus or a traveling carnival would have been a better idea.
Yeah, I mean, I would always say drop the comedy part of it. I think that that's a disease that's affected particularly low budget movies, is that people think that they can take a bad movie or a poorly thought out story and then make it passable by spoofing it, by sending it up.
Yeah.
And I think that it just, because let's be honest, most of these things that are supposedly comedies, horror comedies, they're not really
They're
very
not
funny.
funny. Yeah, they're not. I think they do that so that way I can say, well, we're just making a comedy.
Exactly right.
That's not a really good horror movie. Well, it's a comedy, so
Right, exactly. It's an
excuse us
excuse.
for that.
It's like Pee-wee falling off his bike and saying, "I meant to do that."
Yeah.
But it does require more effort, and it's a greater risk to say we're going to play this dead straight, because people might end up laughing at it as a result.
Yeah.
So I guess a lot of people say, well, if they're going to laugh, we might as well make it a comedy to begin with.
Yeah, and this probably would have worked better as an anthology too.
Yeah.
Each exhibits its own story, which kind of reminded me of like night galleries, or you
Right.
said the first House of Wax that's what it was, right?
Well, yeah.
Mystery of the Wax Museum.
Well, Waxworks.
Waxwork, yeah, okay,
silent
yeah.
film, yeah. And I think Torture Garden, the Amicus film with Burgess Meredith and Jack Palance, is similar. It's a carnival type thing with a sideshow barker showing different people in the tent what their future is going to be. Each exhibit or whatever he shows them sort of portrays or allows them to see what their future is going to be. And that's a pretty solid Amicus anthology movie. I don't know if you're a fan of the Amicus anthology films. You know Amicus?
Yeah.
They did Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror and Torture Garden and several.
Yeah, there was one of them. I can't remember if it was because there was two Tales from the Crypt, right? One of them had Tom Baker in it, so I
Yes,
was like a fan of that, because
right.
he's my favorite doctor. But I think that was that Tales from the Crypt, like the second one?
Well,
It had a
there
different
was
name, I
Tales from the
think.
Crypt and then there was Vault of Horror.
Maybe it was Vault of Horror.
Both of those titles are EC Comics.
Yeah.
So that I guess is like a little mini series in itself. But then they did a bunch of other anthology films that were based on particular writers. Like they did one that was all Robert Bloch stories, and so on. I saw one I think it was called Beyond the Door or Beyond the Grave, and that was reasonably effective. Anyway, people can probably look up online and find a number of the Amicus anthology films. They're not all gems. Some of them are kind of dopey, and sometimes they make the same mistake that this movie makes, in that they try to get around weaknesses in the story by turning them into comedies.
Yeah.
You know, they always have
Yeah,
like
just like
this-
they had the main villain. What's his name? I don't think he had a name. And in the credits, he's listed as Waxwork guy or Waxwork man. But his butler, the gigantic, the tall, that seemed like out of at the end he's like crying, and it's
Yeah.
just like why? Like you didn't like
Yeah.
why is it even in here?
Yeah, it does feel completely inconsistent. There's no, you keep hoping that you're going to be able to predict how people are going to behave, especially that late in the movie.
Yeah.
And yet they're constantly throwing stuff at you that is, it's not, you can't say it's good because it's not predictable. You want a little predictability. You want to be able to feel that you understand the story well enough so that you know what direction the characters are going to go in. And that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I mean, the character looks like they're doing like a Lurch type character. I don't remember Lurch ever crying, but maybe
No.
but
But it was just like it was out of nowhere. He actually, he kills the guy instead of putting him in the, and then now he's upset because the guy yelled at him. I'm just like, you didn't need any of that unless you were going to expand on that more and tell us more about that character.
It all feels like filler.
Yeah.
All that stuff with the cops all feels like filler too. I guess they were trying to do like a Miami Vice type cops.
Yeah, because that didn't make sense either. Because he felt like he didn't really believe him, and then he leaves, and he's like, "Well, wait a minute, I did see something, so now I'm going to go back." And it was just, I don't know.
Yeah, I hate that sort of stuff, like the dialogue he has with Zach, the Zach guy, where he's about, "You shut up,"
Yeah.
Why are you behaving this way? This kid says there's something funny going on in this place, and in front of the guy that may be a murderer or something, you're telling the only witness, "You shut up and sit down."
Yeah.
That's like cliched shit that comes from movies from the 30s, The cops are always, yeah, we're going to take care of this now, That's corny crap, And why that guy was about as unconvincing as a tough guy cop as you could be, right? I mean, he looks like he's wearing his daddy's suit, and he's another guy that doesn't know how to smoke a cigarette.
Yeah.
And the conversation he's having with David Warner seems wrong. The things he's saying seem wrong for his character. Like they're talking, what were they talking about? Egyptian stuff?
Yeah, because he was into Egyptian, which perfect for him to get pushed into the Egyptian. Yeah,
that doesn't sound like the sort of thing that you would hear from a tough guy cop, right? And I think they're trying to suggest there that there was a little flirtation between David Warner character and him, because he seems to be getting very, when he's talking to him. And I don't know what the point of that is either, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't know why they would add filler. I mean, this movie was an hour and 35 minutes. They could have cut some stuff out of this and improved the pacing at the beginning a little bit.
Yeah, with horror movies, you always sort of, and it's funny to say this, but I think even a movie like Spookies, as bad as that movie is, as much of a mess as it is, it's better than this because at least there was a little bit of suspense. You wondered when somebody goes down a hall and goes into a room, there's a little bit of suspense. What's going to happen? There's nothing like that. There's no scenes of them sort of creeping around the wax museum. There's no time spent trying to generate any real suspense, and that's important, I would think, in a film like this, right? It's as soon as they come in, it's like whatever's going to happen happens immediately. They're all going through the displays, and it seems forced and contrived, and it's not funny if it wants to be funny. It's not really scary. I don't know what the hell it is, and yet I'm surprised to see online there's a lot of people declaring their love for this film.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because it's something they saw when they were younger and they just haven't seen it recently.
Yeah, I would say they probably need to watch it again because it's definitely got some issues.
Yeah, it's not too great. But Mystery of the Wax Museum, I would definitely recommend the restored version that was just done, I guess, a couple of years ago. That I think probably is well worth checking out. That's so that was a big production. That wasn't a puny production. It was directed by Michael Curtiz, who ended up directing Casablanca, and some of the camera work and the production aspects are beautifully done. So that I would recommend. House of Wax is a lot of fun. It's very colorful.
yeah, the House of Wax, the original one,
Well,
I really like.
Yes, that's right. Actually, House of Wax was the original of it.
Yeah.
There was this remake of that, yes. But you might want to watch Mystery of the Wax Museum just to see how House of Wax compares, because the stories are very similar.
Yeah, I'm going to do that now.
The difference is that Mystery of the Wax Museum takes place in the 30s. And when they did the remake, they made it into a period piece, I guess because they wanted to show off all the costumes and everything like that. They thought that the sets and the costumes and the period setting would be particularly impressive in 3D. But House of Wax certainly visually is a beautiful film. The only problem I had with House of Wax is that I thought they introduced Vincent Price's deformed face too early in the movie.
Right, yeah.
He really should be, just with the hat down and creeping around, just a presence until later in the film when it's more dramatically effective to reveal him. That's a minor complaint, but it's still a fun film.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the one I was watching that had John Carradine in it.
Well,
unless I completely made that up, I don't know.
was it in black and white?
No, I believe it was in color.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting topic for research, I guess.
Yeah.
I'll edit that in.
Okay, yeah, when we find it. I was going to say, I'm trying to Google real quick, see if I can locate it.
Well, there was a Charlie Chan movie that took place in a wax museum. I think it's actually called Charlie Chan at the Wax Museum. I haven't watched that, but that's available online for people who can't get enough wax museum thrills. Yeah, it's probably pretty long list. It was kind of a sort of an accepted cliche or almost like a subgenre. Wax museums and haunted houses, shared popularity. I guess also because it was an opportunity to bring in gore and morbid stuff that maybe in earlier years, back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, would have been considered, unacceptable in most movies.
Yeah. Terror in the Wax Museum is the one.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, directed by George Fenaday.
Doesn't ring a bell.
And John Carradine's in it, yeah.
Does it have a synopsis?
Setting is in the 1890s in the London Wax Museum. Known for its collection of famous figures, someone is killing the guests. When Dupree is murdered, Margaret Collins' niece decides to continue the family business. So I'm going to have to finish watching that one.
All righty. Well, sounds like anything with John Carradine is usually worth watching for him, if nothing else.
Now, is he the, I'm going to say like great-grandfather of all the other Carradines that are Kung Fu Carradine, all those? Is that the same family?
He was the father of David Carradine.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
And Keith Carradine. Is there another Carradine?
I thought there was another one. I can't remember.
Well, David, of course, is the famous one.
Yeah.
Keith Carradine was a big movie star for a while, and I think didn't he star in Nashville, the Robert Altman film?
I believe so. Yeah.
He wrote that hit song "I'm Easy." I won't do a rendition.
Okay. For some reason, I was thinking there was a daughter or like a.
I'm not sure.
Like an actress that was also, but I may be thinking of somebody else.
Maybe they're descendants.
Yeah.
But John Carradine, as far as I know, is the father of David and Keith.
Okay.
And John Carradine was acting in movies, I guess, up until the late 70s. As a matter of fact, I think he was even doing stage shows in the 80s. I think he did. There was a very expensive and unsuccessful attempt to do Frankenstein on stage. And I think he was in that. I don't think he had a major part, but he was in it. So he kept going for a long time. Even after the arthritis made his hands almost into claws, he was still acting in movies. But I always enjoy his performance in Shockwaves, the Nazi zombie movie.
Yeah.
My favorite Nazi zombie movie. One of my favorite zombie movies, actually. And I think his presence in that movie, along with Peter Cushing, really.
According to IMDb here, his last movie he made was in '95,
Holy shit.
called Jacko,
Jacko. Wow.
which I believe I've seen on maybe one of the Red Letter Media
Well,
Halloween specials. I think they covered it.
it sounds familiar, yeah.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize he was in it. I wonder if it's archive footage or if it's actually him.
It could be. I don't know because I'm not sure when he died. Of course, in '86 he was in the Twilight Zone series, the one from the '80s.
Okay. So, well, he really was a trooper.
Yeah.
Never turn down a role. Take whatever comes along.
I just imagine they probably wheeled him in, read a line, and they wheeled him back out.
Well, for that generation of actors, a lot of those Universal guys, that was pretty much the case. I mean, Lon Chaney was an alcoholic, and he apparently a fearsome alcoholic. He was a menace when he was drunk, but he was acting too, right up to shortly before his death. And he's one of those guys that after he died, they continued to release movies that he had made. They hadn't gotten them out yet into theaters. And Boris Karloff was the same way, right? They had like a whole bunch of Mexican movies that he did that came out a year or two after he died. So, I mean, I admire that. I think if you're an actor, you should act.
Oh, yeah, go ahead and do it up until you can't physically really do it anymore.
Yeah. And if particularly like in the case of some of these guys, the movie might have only been financed because they got them involved.
Yeah.
2 or 3 of those big name actors, folks that are considered reliable box office, and that made a job for everybody.
Yeah, of course, I always think like when somebody gets too old, and it's just like, you don't want to take advantage of them. Maybe somebody's forcing them to do it, or they're just bringing a camera to their house, and
Well, Patrick Macnee apparently at some point he became so infirm that he just went to to like a senior citizens or old age facility for actors, and I guess he lived out the last years of his life there. I saw a photo that was, I guess, was the Hollywood Reporter when they reported his death, and there's a photo of him, and I have to admit I didn't even recognize him. Didn't look anything like himself, So I don't know if they got the wrong photo or if he had just changed so much in his last years.
Yeah, I know he's not acting anymore, but Tim Curry, like he had that
I just saw,
and he's. And I'm like, so, you just imagine, whoever's taking care of him, like taking money that way, letting people come in and film him. I'm just like, that's horrible,
Are you referring to these videos that he's been doing?
I haven't, no, I've seen him do like, he does like autographs from his home and mails them out or whatever, but.
Right. Well, he's done several, I saw one just last night, as a matter of fact. It's funny that you should raise his name. A fan Zoom conferencing with him. I assume this was some sort of thing where you can Zoom conference with Tim Curry for a certain amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he's clearly a person who survived a stroke. His face is sort of partially paralyzed, but he's coherent. And
okay. So he's okay. That's I've just seen the pictures, and I just imagine him being not mentally all there or whatever. But I guess he is.
No, he appears to be. I mean, he doesn't seem. He's not full of life. He's not the Tim Curry that we remember. But it would be surprising if he was, considering what he's gone through. When I see stuff like that, I think to myself, well, maybe there's some hope at some point. I don't know if he's doing therapy or whatever, maybe he can build himself back from that, because he's only in his 70s, which is still a relatively young age nowadays, right? But it's certainly sad when somebody is known for being such a live person, so full of life, to see them in that sort of reduced state. It's kind of sad, but it's better than the alternative.
Right.
So he's still around. I guess we should be thankful for that.
Yep. All right. So I take it you do not recommend Waxwork.
Yeah, I can't.
But you do recommend the original Waxwork, and of course all the other Wax Museum movies.
I think Waxworks, the 1924 silent film, might be worth seeing. I haven't watched it yet myself, but I plan to. But I definitely would recommend Mystery at the Wax Museum, which is 1933 with Lionel Atwill and Fay Wray. And I would recommend House of Wax with Vincent Price, which I guess is 1953 or 57, something like that. Those are two good, entertaining, well-produced, fun Hollywood horror movies. And in both cases, they're kind of important films in film history because Mystery of the Wax Museum was an early color film. It was the last film that was done in two-strip Technicolor. So it's important for that reason. And it's interesting to see what could be done with just two colors. That's interesting in itself. And then A House of Wax was one of the first 3D movies. Certainly one of the first big budget Hollywood 3D movies. So they're worth watching just for their historical significance. But they're also a lot of fun, I think.
Yeah, and of course, House of Wax has Vincent Price. So.
Can't beat Vincent Price. Always fun to watch. Yeah, and that also has what's his name, Charles Bronson, playing an early role. I don't know. I guess he did a couple of films with Vincent Price around that time. He was also in that Master of the World, the Jules Verne adaptation.
Yeah,
I think he was also in that. So yeah, it's interesting to see Charles Bronson at an early stage in his development.
Yeah. All right. Well, I don't know if I recommend this one or not. I think I mean, if you never see it, you're not missing anything. I definitely don't recommend the sequel.
Okay, so cross that out the list.
Yeah. So don't even bother with that one. But yeah, all the other ones I recommend. I mean, even the remake of House of Wax was, for what it was kind of enjoyable. I know everybody hated it because Paris Hilton was in it, but she doesn't last long in it, so you're not.
Oh, there you go.
You're not like tortured by her for the whole thing. But she wasn't bad. I'm not going to like act like she was the worst thing about that movie. But yeah, I recommend all the other ones. House of Wax. I'm going to finish watching the Mystery of the Wax Museum. I'm going to watch you sent me that first one, the Waxworks. I'm gonna check that out. So yeah, definitely I recommend it. Just not this one.
Yeah. It's it's very definitely a 80s film in all the worst ways.
Yeah. So just wait till somebody listens to this episode, takes our ideas and remakes it, and then you can watch that one.
There you go. Well, we'll see if that happens.
Yeah. All right. So where can everybody find your movies at on the internet there?
Well, Demon Resurrection, my film from 2008, is available on Tubi TV and Zumo TV, and it's also available on Vimeo on demand, and it's probably available on some various independent Roku channels, and I have Twitter accounts and Facebook pages for both of my films, Demon Resurrection and Sleepless Nights, which is a new, re-edited, restored version, revamped as we're calling it. It's a vampire movie. That's going to be out soon, hopefully. It's basically the edit is completed and it'll be going out hopefully in the next few months, So something to look forward to. And you can keep up with the latest news on Sleepless Nights and Demon Resurrection on Facebook. There are easily found pages for both films. A fellow by the name of David Fresina reached out to me about a movie that he made. It's called When the Witches Came to Town. And it's a very intriguing premise. He went and interviewed all the people who were in the town where they shot The Witches of Eastwick.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of interesting behind-the-scenes stuff. And I don't think it's available on streaming, but it's available on DVD, and it might be available on streaming eventually. So you can look him up, David Fresina, and When the Witches Came to Town should be available on Amazon for purchase. Worth checking out.
I'll have to get all the links and put them in the description when I post this.
And I also like to put him in touch with you, and maybe at some point we could do a show about this documentary.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting. No, you are talking about The Witches of Eastwick.
The Witches of Eastwick with Jack Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson, yes. Love that movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I love that movie.
Well, then you might be the perfect audience for this, because it shows you all the places, all the locations where the film was shot, which has become a kind of a popular thing on YouTube. You see a lot of I saw a lot of that for Let's Scare Jessica to Death as well, where people go to the house where it was shot, to see if it's still standing. It is, surprisingly. Yeah. So I
mean, other than Jack Nicholson and Cher and what the when they throw up that woman throws up all the cherry pits.
Oh right,
it's like
that's
what I remember the most about that movie.
Well, David actually reminded me that this was the movie Witches of Eastwick was directed by George Miller.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. I had forgotten that completely. I thought it was, and apparently it was a very troubled production. So another reason to check this out.
Yeah, I'll have to check
all
that
the
out.
details on what a scandalous, production it was, what a difficult production it was.
We'll have to do that. Yeah, get him come on and talk about it. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, might be interesting. Yeah,
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this was a fun episode, and until next week, we will continue to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Cheaply Made.